Hello and welcome to Sim Strategy Gaming. I'm Sim. In this episode, we will look at different characters in the game of Railway Empire 2 and how they affect the cost of personnel and locomotives and how technology works in conjunction with this. First, the gangster, sort of the main antagonist of the game and my least favorite character. He got the ability to intimidate so that he can acquire factories from cities without an auction. This is only beneficial in scenarios where there is a lot of competitors, and there aren't so many competitors in any of the scenarios. And if there are competitors, they really don't make that much of a difference. They don't expand that much. But if one is playing the free play games where one can set up the games as one pleases, that means perhaps a little bit more. But then auctions are sort of okay, a nice thing of the game, and then to skip the auctions, I don't know, it's not really worth it. And then these shady deals where you can have 20% the chance of refunding the cost of an auction. That sort of works against his ability to intimidate to buy without an auction. So they sort of go against each other. And then the self-thought, his drawback, to pay 30% more for tracks, tunnels, and bridges, that is a major, absolutely a major drawback. So he comes out as I would say one can of course feel free to feel whatever one likes about these things, but I would say he's the worst. He is sort of the antagonist. He is the snide enemy to be defeated. Moving on to the entrepreneur, many her, she really is fond of her. Beautiful looking, really a lady from Dornick, France, from a wealthy merchant family. She has this ability that makes her express trains more profitable. But an important thing about the game and about all strategy games is that anything that comes into play very early in the game is much more beneficial for you than things that comes in later. And usually one would set up mixed trains in the beginning because one can only afford one set of trains, and then one set up mixed trains because one cannot really afford to set up these special express lines in the very beginning. So only later on her ability comes into play. And then to have this raised from 10% into 20%, it doesn't really make a huge difference later in the game when one already is hopefully making a lot of money. And then social skills, 5% higher staff efficiency. There is a maximum of 125% staff efficiency. And then one cannot, with her ability, reach 130. One can only then just save a little bit of money. I usually go for 125 or at least 123.5% staff efficiency. And then one only saves a little bit of money from her social skills. We can look further into that when we look at how to set up the personnel. But this isn't, it's just about saving a tiniest little bit of money, and it doesn't really make a huge effect on the game as I see it. And then to be safety conscious, always important to think safety first, but to have maintenance complete 20% slower, that makes for the train routes all in all to be slower. All of the trains, both freight trains, mixed trains, express trains as well, they complete their tours slower because they all need maintenance. So I would say that is more or less a serious drawback. And she's neither one of my favorite characters, but definitely better than than the gangster. Then we move on to the professor. Many would say that the professor is not a very good character, but that very much depends on when in the game you are playing. Very early in the game, say with this, there is this level in on Ireland. Ireland gains steam that starts very early in the game in the 1840s. And then early in the game, the locomotives are much more expensive because one haven't gotten time to get all those nice techs that makes locomotives cheaper. And then to have locomotives then 60% cheaper, which is a huge difference. I mean, that's less than half the cost. It is a very good thing, and that makes one, at least with Ireland gains steam, one can connect to all of the cities and still have all the cities on the map and still have money left for a couple of locomotives to run on the lines. And that can come on very nice, and that comes in very early in the game. So he can be a good character if one is playing early in the game. If one is playing in the 20th century, he is definitely not really worth it because locomotives are so cheap anyway, so late in the 19th century as well. His eloquent bonus, where the auction price is reduced by 30%, is also a great ability, particularly then early in the game, because later in the game one will have many good techs that already reduces the auction prices, and then this doesn't really matters so much. And then his major drawback, his unpopularity, to be unpopular in this game when one is making the most money from passenger and mail by far, particularly later in the game. In the very start, one might make the most money from freight, and then comes passengers, and then comes mail. But late in the game, mail and passengers are very important. So even though one can get a good head start with the professor, his unpopularity makes for a much slower growth later in the game and 50% less revenue. That is a lot of money. So the professor, he is sort of a mixed um, mixed characters. He can be good, he can be, but mostly perhaps not so very good. There are better characters than him, I think at least. And then the General, he is perhaps my favorite character or second favorite character, depending on whether or not one needs to build a lot of tunnels and bridges. There are some maps where one is, particularly in Scandinavia, for example, when one is going to build bridges all across in every which direction, there's a lot of places that one must build a bridge. One cannot avoid it. There are these huge oceans that one has to pass. And then perhaps another character would be better because 30% higher cost for tunnels and bridges, that is significant. But then to have 30% lower track construction costs. Tracks are, of course, in Railway Empire a very important thing to be laying. One lays tracks all the time, and one makes the most money from connecting to new cities, and of course then connecting by tracks. And one can very often avoid building tunnels and bridges as long as one watches the contour lines and make sure that one avoids the tunnels and bridges. Little clever planning there, and then he becomes he can make connect faster than the other characters. And then on top of that, he has this secure logistics that gives 10% higher revenue from freight and mail. And the freight and mail, freight being the most important way of revenue in the very beginning, and mail being by far the most important way of making revenues in the late game. So he's both good in the start and good in the end, and they'll being very, very, very profitable. And to have this just 10% higher revenue, that is a major bone. So he might be my favorite character, as long as one doesn't have to build bridges. The tunnels in Railway Empire is something often to be avoided. One would rather have build a little more bridges and then go for the higher incline in order to avoid the tunnels, because the tunnels are a bit quirky. So, but then sometimes one has to build the tunnels on some maps, particularly in the American West Coast maps. The last of the American continent scenarios, one has to build tunnels. But still, tunnels are often left for the later part of the game, when one has so much money anyways. So he is definitely a favorite character of mine, and he's kind of cool looking. And then we have the lady. If one, depending on one's play style, if one really wants to go into this part of the game where one builds a lot of factories and buys rural businesses, and of course, as soon as you buy the factories, as soon as you buy the rural businesses, you want to upgrade them, and all new buildings in cities, that doesn't only include factories, that also includes this very important immigration offices, libraries, and universities, and perhaps even these museums. And I don't build so much museums, but at least immigration offices, super important to build as soon as possible, but they are sort of cheap anyway. And then libraries, I don't know. Well, immigration offices are often actually better than libraries, as long as the cities are growing by themselves naturally. And universities, of course, that's a must, because a city cannot grow beyond 90,000 citizens without a university. So, and her harsh leadership, personnel cost 50% more. Okay, personnel is one of those major expenses that one has, but still the expenses in this game is much less than what one makes from mail, freight, and passengers. So that isn't such a bad thing, actually, to pay a little bit more for that, and one definitely gets those money back from the cheaper buildings that one built. But she represents a different play style. She represents that play style when one doesn't make everything go into building rails. My play style is that I keep rapid expansion to make the most money, because one makes much more money from connecting to all the cities, and I wait until I have connected pretty much all the cities that I can connect to before I start buying up factories and rural businesses and upgrade them. So that her abilities are they're good, but they come in very late in the game, and everything that happens in the very early game is much more important than whatever happens in the late game, because in the late game you already got a lot of money, and then wealth accumulates. So if one gets a good head start in the very beginning, that is much more, gives more money in the long run than to make more money later on. So she's perhaps not my favorite character, but if one is into the building industry part of the game, and industries are and upgrades are enormously expensive, so then she can really make a huge difference there, and she's a cool character to play with if one wants to play a little different style. And then we have the engineer, my perhaps second favorite character, or sometimes my favorite character, because he got this fantastic. He's a technical genius, and laying tracks, tunnels, and bridges, everything 20% lower cost. that is absolutely magnificent. One can connect to so many more cities so much faster. And it doesn't matter if one has to build a little tunnel or bridges, and if one is going to build something in, say, in Scandinavia or in Switzerland or in the Alps or a lot of places where there are difficult, rugged terrain. And many of these downloadable contents with balcony, Switzerland, and also in India, that it's a lot of need for tunnels and bridges, and the terrain goes up and down. Not so much in the Midwest of America, then it's completely flat. Then the general will be a better choice. But in many of the more advanced on more advanced maps, and one really needs to build tracks, to build tunnels and bridges, he's an absolute must. He's one of the better. And then all locomotives require 10% less maintenance. That is also a very good thing. Maintenance costs money, and maintenance takes time. So that both makes his trains complete their route faster, and may pay for may have less, spend less money on that. And then, okay, he's a bit unemotional, as many engineers are. I'm an engineer myself. Perhaps that says something about me. I don't know. I'm an emotional engineer. But then to have the express bonus reduced from 10% until 5%, I mean, the express bonus, many people, oh, we must go for the express bonus. It's so important to have this. And if the express bonus is losing, then all of this warning triangles blink up all over the map and such. But express bonuses aren't really that crucial. One can have no express bonuses at all, and still make for a good revenue. And he gets a little bit of express bonuses. It's a little drawback, but not really a bad thing. Speed in Railway Empire isn't that crucial as long as one has tractive power for the locomotives are much more important often than the top speed, because one can it's not so easy to reach the top speed anyways, because of when one has incline and one have heavy loads on the wagons, and then tractive power is more important, so that at least the trains doesn't go down to a grinding halt, but keep on a pretty steady pace. But now, before we look further into technology, let's have a look at the personnel and then the locomotives, which are very much affected by the technology development throughout the game. There are 4 different types of personnel, and then also saboteurs, but they're a little bit of a different story, so we will come back to those later. There are the engineers, that reduces the maintenance cost of maintenance needs of the locomotives, which both affect the speed of the locomotives when one takes into account how long they have to stand and do the maintenance, and also the maintenance cost. Someone gets this money pretty much immediately back. There is a stokers that increases the maximum speed, which is of course very important. And then there is the train personnel that increases the popularity of the trains and thus the ticket prices. And then there is security, which might be the most important actually, because they increase both the revenue of freight and mail, both being very important. And I also think that they have an effect on these saboteurs that sometimes try to ruin our games, and they catch them. The way to modify the efficiency of these different personnel types are pretty much the same. One can bump them up until a maximum of 125, and I think it should be 125. I like to go for the maximum, and then perhaps this often the last step is a little bit more costly than the previous step, we'll see that now it goes up to 4.5%, but the last step now is just 1.8%, and I pay the same, and one can't increase it further. So whatever is surplus over 125%, that just goes to waste. So often in the early game, when money is kind of scarce, I'm a little stingy and I just go for 123.2%. But later on, when money is coming in good, and I'm more focused on achieving the mission objectives and to have everything running fine, I go up to 125. There's also the option to reduce the efficiency in order to try to save money on the personnel cost, but that often is just makes for bad business, as you then reduce your revenues, and also make for more maintenance costs and longer rides and for slower trains and such. Pretty much could go for the max. And then which of these one should choose? One can see to the left here that training is where one perhaps gets the most for the money. Wages counts for twice as much, but they cost more than twice the price, and wages aren't affected by any technology. So if one has good technology training, and then perhaps employee welfare or sometimes recruitment has more technology benefits to it. So it depends on what kind of technology one has. And now I'm very late in the game, so then I would definitely go for employee welfare and training. Early in the game, if one's playing in the early 19th century, it might actually be a better thing to reduce the work hours a bit, and perhaps also wages, and increase the wages to get the maximum amount. And one can see a total cost per week at the bottommost, to try to tinkle with this back and forth. But for the most part of the game, I would go for a maximum of training, a little bit of employee welfare, and then just leave it like that for pretty much the entirety of the game. There is also an option to cash out a bonus, and if one does that, and that might actually be perhaps the smartest thing to do, then I can reduce this and see that there still be 125%, even though I have lower stats for the different workers because they're so happy that they had the bonus. One thing to point out is that if you're playing with Helen Gerard, then she has 5% extra efficiency to it all, and then one cannot bump it up that or shouldn't increase the stats so much. She's already having a 5% extra, so take note then that she is still having a maximum of 125%, so that she doesn't really have more efficient trained personnel than the other characters. She just pays less for them. And one sees now that even though personnel is definitely the greatest post on our budget, the ones that cost the most, more than maintenance, fuel, and interest rate all put together, we are making so much money on our mailbags, passengers, and freight that it's absolutely well worth it, I think, to have 125% maximum efficiency on our personnel. And besides, I personally at least like my personnel to be the best of the best. And now, before we look further into tech, we're going to have a look at the different stats of the locomotives. First, notice this suitability. We have mixed, we have express, and we have freight trains. but these are only suggestions for what they can be used for. One can achieve express bonuses on freight trains, and one can use express trains for mixed transportation and even for freight, but then they are often more suited for the tasks that they are suited for, what they are recommended to be. My absolute favorite type of class is the mixed ones that can serve as a workhorse for pretty much everything. But if one sets up dedicated passenger trains, then that do not pick up any freight goods. It's very important to remember that freight goods are much, much heavier than these passengers and mail bags. So express trains, even though they have higher speed, higher maximum speed, will often go very much slower than the mixed trains if they are also carrying freight. So if they have low tractive power like this, the class 121, it's a better train, much more expensive train than the Inu, but it has less tractive power. So it will actually be slower if it also is dragging along just a couple of freight wagons. So speed, I would say, is less important than tractive power in general, and also if there are high inclines, there will be, even though it's only carrying express goods, one can the trains will slow down a lot if they have low tractive power. Of course, also price is an important question. Express trains often being much more expensive than the freight trains, and then the mixed trains, and then the freight trains often being the cheapest ones. So if there are lines that only carry freight, where there are no passengers going, there's just from one rural resource and into a city, then a freight train would be the best choice by far. And then popularity, that has to do with the ticket prices for the passengers. So the higher popularity, the more people pay for being going with the train. But it has absolutely nothing to do with the freight cost. The freight cost is fixed, and it has nothing, passengers, they pay for how fast they reach their goal and how popular the trains are. Reliability is important for all types of trains, and it has to do with how often they break down. No matter how well maintained the train are, it has still are prone to having small breakdowns from now and then, and this has to do with the reliability. And then there is the maintenance requirements, how often they will have to go and be maintained, how fast this maintenance gauge are dropping. And then the consumption is how much it costs to have the train on, how to have it running. If one now looks at the different types of trains that I have set up here, one can see that this is a freight-only line, and of course should be run by a freight train. There is no point in popularity means nothing here, and it has good tractive power, and it's only carrying freight goods, so that no point in having anything beyond a freight train. And then, at least early in the game, mixed trains are usually the best choice. One sets up the mixed train first because one can only have one line going back and forth, perhaps. and then there is no particular. One doesn't have the money to set up express only trains. So then just later in the game, when one can expand these zones or tracks into being parallel, and to have express trains in the fastest routes, and then to have perhaps mixed trains later on. On this particular setup, I haven't yet set up any express trains, and that is due to the fact that if I now choose an express train, I will lose out on all of the express bonuses that I have on my mixed trains, and mixed trains can easily achieve express bonuses. But as soon as a faster way of traveling becomes known to the population, they will no longer consider my mixed trains as being fast enough to achieve express bonuses. But now that I have built on this map so many parallel tracks, having here, say, that there are four, there are two innermost and two outermost, and the two outermost, they can be for mixed, and then I can use this faster train for express goods, switch it over to express here, remove the stops that aren't where no express goods can be picked up, and add these two special wagons here, the dining car and the mail car. I don't have the caboose because you can't have more than 125% efficiency anyways. And then if I add the caboose, then there are only a maximum of 8 wagons allowed for a train to be dragging behind it. And now if I have the dining wagon and the mail car, then I'm down to 6 possible wagons that I can actually make money from. And if I have the caboose as well, it costs me extra money, and quite a bit actually. And then there are less room for passengers and less room for making money. So then I would rather go back and just make sure that the personnel are up to 125% efficiency by other means than to have an extra car just for them. And now that we know a bit about characters, locomotives, and personnel, we are ready to jump into the big section of research and development. There are very many different texts to be researched, and they have a huge difference in cost, in invention points, and also in their usefulness. So it's good to know a bit about this before as one plays the game. The accumulation of invention points are fixed. There's 60 per month, and there is no way to increase or decrease this in any ways, at least not in the regular scenarios. The most useful thing to be researching is by far new locomotives. We can see that the difference here, for example, here very much in the beginning between this rocket, the very earliest, and the next one, the Adler, is big. It's much more than usually one would just get 5% more extra here and extra there. But the difference is here, 46 kilometers an hour, 36 kilometers an hour, that is almost 15-20% more tractive power as well, many more percentages. So if one has the opportunity to go for a new locomotive, that would usually be the best. Just take care that it is often better to have the mixed train as the best train. If the best train that you're having is an express train, it will be very hard to achieve express bonuses on mixed trains, and even freight trains can achieve express bonuses, as we saw earlier. But beyond that, I would say that this bonds increase tax, that there are a few of, they are the best. It's to borrow money is a fantastically important thing in the railway empire, to just get your hands on as much cash as possible. Of course, there is some interest to be paid, but one usually, if one plays a little bit cleverly, gets a lot more back from the money one invests than these interests that go into the bank. Other than that, there is these warehouses that are very much important and part of a bit more advanced strategy. But to have access to these warehouses that are new in Railway Empire 2 from Railway Empire 1, they really make a huge difference. That means that one can use the same lines more and doesn't have to build specially dedicated line for every resource that goes into every city. One can just have one line going into one city, and then from there being redistributed from a warehouse. There is also somewhere around here, there is the hotel tech, which is also very, very important. That means that passengers can switch trains in rural stations, or stations that you can just build in wherever you want in the middle of nowhere. And this can also come in very handy in a little bit more advanced strategy that we will look on in another video. Beyond that, one just has to sort of go through all of these tax things that has to do with increasing ticket prices for passengers, and as well as increasing revenue for mail. That's also very good handy tax. One can also increase the number of passengers and number of mail goods. That is tiny bit less good, because it often fills up the trains. Often the train lines will be filled up, and then one doesn't get anything back from having more passengers or more mailbags. But this increase of price is always a very good thing. And then to reduce the price of locomotives, that is also, of course, very beneficial. But then one must take into account these things, that character bonuses, like with the professor, for example, he has this ability to reduce the cost of locomotives, and that is taken into account before the tech. So he will actually get less benefits from the reduction of what he has already been reduced. And the same goes for the engineer and the general that has reduced track construction cost. They will get less from this reduction of constructing bridges. But then some of these characters, the general, for example, he will have more from mail bags, and that will accumulate. He will then get more benefits from having even further increased revenues from mail bags. So that is something to keep in mind depending on what character you are playing. Speed, of course, is also one of those important things, but when this speed techs, they are always such that they only increase the speed of the later locomotives. So you can see here that this is up to the Adler, and the Adler is a tech that is before. So this has nothing to do with the speed of the trains that comes in later. So this might not be so very fantastically good. I actually would rather go for, if I had a choice, Sometimes one just have to go along the main line, but this leaf spring suspension that increases the maximum speed that the locomotives can corner. It is not only the incline that slows down the trains, but also the sharpness of the curves. And often there will be some curves, and then to have the locomotives slow down less is of course very beneficial. Everything that has to do with reducing the employee cost, as we looked at with the personnel, is of course also important. And the more one has in one particular type, the more one can lean on that category in order to reduce the cost. But there are very many different of these, and they might not be so very good. I go for a lot of service trainings. If I see some cheap text that reduce the service training, I can go for that. But these are not generally considered to be the most important ones. There are much more important the texts to be focusing on. So perhaps skip on this and rather focus on having a little bit of creative accounting or better locomotives, and not get too caught up in this side text unless they are particularly good. Auctions, to have money coming back from auctions. If one is playing against a lot of AIs in this free play games, when one not scenarios and not campaign, but just the games that one set up on themselves, where it might be cool to have several competitors to compete against, then auctions are a bit important. But in reality, they don't really pay off that well, and they are not used that much. Reliability is always a good thing. That means that the trains break down less often, and then keeps a more smoother flow. And the same goes with maintenance time, to reduce that. Of course, that will also be an important thing, to have the trains coming back online as soon as possible and not clog up the maintenance depots. And then the maintenance requirements, that might be more important, because one pays for the maintenance and for how much maintenance they need, but not how long it takes. So better to have maintenance requirements reduced than to have reliability reduced. And then increase the amount of packages, and then there are these special wagons, but they come in a little bit later in the game. One needs to have the money for dedicated express lines in order to utilize the mail car, and also say here we have the dining car. These two are sort of a must for express lines, to have fast trains that have only express goods, and to have this dining car and the mail car attached to them. I not so often use the refrigerator car, but if there are particular dedicated freight lines that use have fresh freight, like milk and vegetables and meat, I think. I'm not quite remember it. But some of these goods, but not all of the goods, are being bumped up by 25%. So it might not be that very important. And they are a bit expensive, and also they cost invention points that could rather be used for better locomotives. Better locomotives are the way to go. The caboose, I very seldomly use the caboose, because I don't think you can bump up efficiency more than 125%, and I rather bump it up by increasing the personnel cost a bit. And more reliability. And then also there are the option to have new factories, be able to build new factories. That might be, and then there is also technologies that allows you to build new factories. Factories comes in a bit late in the game, and often there isn't so much need for them. It is much better to keep connecting and to have efficient routes than to dig too far into this kind of expensive ventures into industry. But of course, depending on how much they cost and how much you need them for mission objectives, for example. But say here, if I were at the Jenny Lin technology, I would rather go for the hotel and then this excellent, fantastically foreign workers reduce the track construction cost. That is very important. And rather skip on these paper mills and say that, okay, not every city can get all the goods. And rather go for foreign workers and then hydraulic cranes, which increases the transport revenue for mailbags. That's very nice. And perhaps also skip on this sponsorship, which reduces a little bit of personnel cost, but not too much. It is a sort of a good thing to be constructing all buildings, including both the factories and also the railroad buildings, being the railroad extensions, the hotel, the restaurant, the marketplace, and of course the maintenance depots and the warehouses that are expensive to have all of these different things reduced. But then I don't build that many factories, and keep in mind that if one reduces the cost of railroad buildings, station extensions, then if one tries to sell them back after acquiring these technologies, then you will get less back because they are worth less if one has this. They're both cheaper to build, but also one gets less back from demolishing them, which one otherwise gets everything back if one changes. Demolishes anything, or if one demolishes tracks or bridges or some of these station extensions, but one gets nothing back from the demolishing or the downgrading buildings or factories, and also with tunnels. And then to reduce the construction cost of tunnels is much less important than into reducing the track construction costs, because one doesn't build that many tunnels. And even when one builds a tunnel, one also, of course, have to lay tracks. So tracks are a very, very, very nice tech. And then with sand, water, and lubricating oil consumption, the general consumption of all these locomotives, that is a medium good tech to be having. It is always important. Earning a little bit more from rural businesses, I don't know. You don't make that much money from rural businesses anyway. The reason for buying up rural businesses is not to make money, is to make sure that all the cities get what they need, and perhaps there are some mission objectives that require you to either buy up rural businesses, or one needs to grow a city into a certain size. But then to increase the profit, it's I don't know, it's not really that important. Much more important to go for this fantastic Bryant locomotive that I much rather have, so not dwell too much up in here. The residual value when you're replacing old locomotives, that's less important than to have the actual price of the locomotives reduced. So perhaps not the most important thing to be aiming for. And then maintenance time, yes, that is also a good thing. New locomotives. And then you have this probability for higher quality saboteurs. Well, I don't use saboteurs that much. The only time that I use saboteurs is if I really have a lot of money, and after all my cities that I have access to are being connected, then I might have a little bit of surplus money to dwell into other things, and I might go for some saboteurs. But when I go for saboteurs, I only use the saboteurs to steal my competitor's tech. I never bother with trying to ruining his infrastructure, his revenues, because I make so much better laid tracks than the AI. The AI isn't really fantastically good, to say the least. And if I were to go for some personnel reduction, I go for this in-service training, because that's what I often use the most to increase my personnel efficiency. And then there is the fantastic, super important immigration office. To have access to this immigration office that you can build in cities that are kind of small, they are just required to be 30,000 or more citizens. And then it allows the increase right away to be 14% higher. This is really important to make the cities grow. That's how you make the money, because bigger cities produce more mail and more passengers, and it is by transporting passenger and mail one is really making the money. So this is one of those very important things, and also all the texts that increase the effect of these immigration offices up to, I think, more than 30% increase you can have, and that is one of those really important things. And then there are the maintenance posts. I don't use maintenance posts that much. Sometimes there are particular setups, particular more advanced setups where one can, like if one is using 8-lane gridiron and the trains are crisscrossing back and forth, to have a maintenance breakdown just in between that blocks all of them, pretty much all of the 8 lanes at once. If one has this or other more advanced setups, where one must absolutely not have a breakdown, and if there is a breakdown, this must be fixed as fast as possible, then one can use the maintenance post. And maintenance posts are really expensive to run, and then one might take this tech, but I would rather say that this is one of those less important things, than for things that easier setups to make things easy and smooth is much better than to make super advanced setups that require maintenance posts, in addition to being also often very expensive and advanced and have a higher probability of things going wrong. Even though it is kind of cool to build something extra fancy, of course. And then this one are kind of an interesting text: to accelerate the processing of all wagons. That can be a really important thing, because very soon the trains they will fill up these the tracks that you have laid, and as one reaches say more than 5-6% waiting time on a particular line, then one cannot put more trains on them. But if the acceleration of the processing of wagons are increased a bit, then one can perhaps put on a little bit more trains on the same tracks, because when trains are waiting, they're often waiting by the stations, and they're waiting at the stations because the trains before them, they are doing either maintenance or they are processing their wagons. So if with faster maintenance time and faster processing of wagons, one can put more trains on the same tracks, and that is a good thing. But only a little bit later in the game, in the very beginning of the game. Often there is no need to fill up the tracks to the max, and there will be less than 5% waiting time. And then there is no point in having this. But late in the game, this can be very crucial. This can be a very good type of technology. And then one can reduce the construction of bridges, which is not as important as reducing the construction cost for tracks, usually. But there are some levels where there are a lot of bridges, say with the Scandinavian map, for example. This can be becoming very handy, and it's much more handy than to have construction lower cost for tunnels. Even though tunnels are more expensive, one usually builds less tunnels than bridges. And so having a little bit of construction reduction on bridges is a good thing. And bridges are in many ways expensive, particularly if you are playing with, say, with the general, my favorite character. It's important to reduce this because he already has a higher cost for it, and then have more to benefit from a reduction since he has this drawback. And then from here on out, the game pretty much repeats itself. It has the same type of tech coming over and over again, further increases the reduction of the price by 5%, and so on. It depends a little bit where you are in the game. The one scenario or one game pretty much spans over at least less than a decade. Sometimes there is a decade shift, so that it might be a good idea to if one say, well, if one are at 1899, to save up a little bit of technology in order to be ready for the decade shift, and then to have be faster, be able to reach the next set of locomotives that come available as you go into a new decade. But beyond that, there is pretty much a repetition of the same type of text, only with new names and new prices. Sometimes the same tech with the same effect can have different prices, ranging from 100 invention points to 300 invention points. So then to go for a tech that is might not be that useful but really cheap, that can also be a very good strategy. But anyways, I guess that pretty much sums it all up. One can feel free to like and subscribe, leave some comments, and then I hope to see you next time around. Enjoy the game, and goodbye.